As you know, with the hip hop culture, there is a very strong connection between the prison system, the prison culture, and the thug life, whatever
Yeah.
that means. So there's all these connections between risky sexual behavior, lack of condom availability. I mean,
Well,
condoms.
you don't get condoms in prison.
Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, there's all these connections that are being made along the lines. Plus, if you're doing something that's perceived as not acceptable socially in the bedroom, are you really going to think about putting on a condom? Doesn't that make you even think more about what you're doing? Most of the time, you don't want to think about it because it's what you're told not to do from day one. So by saying, "Oh, hold on, baby, I got to put on a condom," you got to think about what you're actually about to do.
Well, it takes two now. She could also say, where's the condom?
Well, I think particularly when you're talking about young men who are having sex with other young men or older men, that's exactly the point. And I think people aren't thinking about what they're doing or have some sense of guilt or shame about it. And using a condom is acknowledging the fact that this is what I'm doing and I might be at risk because of what I'm doing, and that I've been told by my church or by my community that this is wrong. And so I think that's a very important point. The other point I would make about we know people who are getting infected, and we know that there's there's a growth in the epidemic among young black gay men. But all of the things that you would assume about that aren't necessarily true. I mean, again, like they aren't necessarily having more sex. They are not having riskier sex. We have studies that show us this. They aren't having riskier sex. And one thing we have to remember too, I think when we think about HIV and people becoming infected, we think about lots of people having lots of partners and promiscuous sex. But remember, the majority of new infections happen within relationships. And that's true for gay men, and it's true, and bisexual men. It's true for heterosexual couples as well, people as well. And so what that means is that that person is trusting the other person. And I think part of the issues that we've been talking about, people not having father, people having the prison experience, people want to have someone that they can trust and that they can have that intimate connection with. Right. And they may leap to the conclusion, young men may leap to the conclusion that they're going to trust this guy because they want to. And they need to, because they want intimacy. It's not something that's, these are people. Young black men are human beings, and it's not a mystery. We have plenty of evidence why people may need intimacy because they're not getting it.
But does intimacy mean non-condom use? See, that's
well, I think what I've read in some of the studies is that it's the issue of trust. It's the issue of finding that person that you can really trust, and that you not using a condom is just a symptom of it. It's sort of you will make that decision because you want to trust this person. At least that's the way I'm interpreting it, and I see how that can be the case.
Yeah.
And I also see that being the case among some women as well, whether it's women who may be women who are immigrants or and who may be in a relationship they've been in for a long time and having safe sex in that relationship until they get married, for example, and neither one of the people have ever been tested, but one of them is HIV positive, for example. That's not that uncommon.
No, it's not uncommon, but it seems to me that if a person wants trust, you can desire trust as much as you want, but if you don't know the sexual history of the person that you're sleeping with, then you're putting your life in danger.
And that's the message we want to get out to people, but people can't necessarily hear that if they have a whole...
Because?
Well, I think for the younger generation, a lot of times what happens is we have this hyper-sexualization process from the hip-hop culture. To be a real man means to be out there having as much sex as possible, even though they're not saying it as such. Well, some songs actually do say it. But, and then from there, if you're having a lot of sex, are you really going to think about condom usage each of those times? I don't know. And then also, I think part of being a real man is not really thinking about what you're actually doing. when it comes to having sex.
So now we're talking about the true definition of masculinity. We're talking about,
Well, black masculinity.
Well, black masculinity, but the whole idea is, I'm wondering, to go out and have multiple partners, even though you're saying that that's not exactly the case, but because that's what the hip-hop genre is, then I think we become a victim of a stereotype that can be very self-destructive.
Right.
And it's like, so, as a psychologist now, I'm looking at the whys, what's underneath the behavior, and if you're looking at it from a CBT model, cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a thought that creates a feeling that dictates a behavior. Right. And if there's a behavior that is, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think you can go back and look at some early studies of black men in general, and you look at what does it mean to be a man. And so there was a study that posited that for European men, the way that you expressed your masculinity, you had options like getting a job and taking care of your family, getting an education, and so forth.
Yeah.
And having climbing a career path, being successful. Whereas, obviously, if you look at the history of black people and black men in this country, we're still we may have a black president, but we're a long way from having a society where black men actually have all the same opportunities. So for a long period of time, men would create a different path to sort of have that sense of providing or being or masculine or creating a concept of what it meant to be masculine. They had to create an alternative way because this one wasn't open to them. Mm-hmm. And in some cases that became, creating a pose where you're cool and you are
pose.
The cool pose.
Yeah, I heard
and
that.
you're in control. Nothing bothers you, and therefore you wouldn't. You're not going to worry about condoms. That's for.
I think it also comes back to this black masculinity based in thug culture and hip hop culture, and this concept of like invincibility. Mm-hmm. Like I'm invincible. Can't nobody mess with me. I'm coming from this hood. What you gonna do to me? Because I know where I rep. You know what I mean? It's this mentality that in order to be a real man, you have to be able to face anything. In the face of anything, you should be able to just be strong, be hard. Right. And I think when it comes to thinking about, risk for HIV/AIDS, it's like, that's not gonna happen to me. That's what happens to other folk. I'm young, I'm fun. I'm young, I'm having fun. That doesn't apply to me. Right. And I think a lot of times also when you're taking on this hyper, sexual activity, you're not thinking about condom usage specifically with other men maybe, because you're like, well, he's not gonna get pregnant.
Right.
So
right.
What am I really worried about?
Right.
And HIV, that's not gonna happen to me.
Right. And I think that's the key thing in black communities is that people will have the same amount of information about HIV, they know how HIV is transmitted, but their perception of their own risk is low. It's not gonna happen to me. That's either A, because in the beginning because it was a white disease, a white gay disease, but now we all know it's not that. But still, there's this notion that it's not going to happen to me. Somehow, either it's because I'm invincible, or it's because...
This is a very important thing for us to talk about. We need to talk about our sexual issues. We need to talk about our relationships. These are very important things to talk, regardless of whatever sexual behavior you're having. So on the couch is what we're going to do. We're going to get on the couch and we're going to unpack. We're going to talk through some of those concerns and some of those issues. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's just differences. That's what we're trying to do. So again, on the couch. We look forward to having more topics to share with you. And I do want to leave you with this. Each one, reach one. And a society should be judged based on the way they treat the least of its citizenry. So there's no big I's, no little U's. There's just us, the human race. Go in a good way. We'll see you. Thank you. All right.
That's very frustrating. But we do have to
Brown David